Hello, this is the AI Lab. Today it's my pleasure to welcome Professor Milton Mueller. Milton is professor at the Georgia Institute of Technology School of Public Policy. He specializes in the political economy of information and communication and is the author of 7 books and numerous journal articles. His work informs not only public policy, but also science and technology studies, law, economics, communications, and international studies. The reason? An article entitled It's Just Distributed Computing, Rethinking AI Governance. Let's hear what Milton has to say. So, hello, Milton. In your paper, you say that AI is actually just distributed computing rather than some revolutionary new technology. Why is that distinction important, and how does it reshape how we talk about AI?
Well, first of all, distributed computing is a revolutionary technology, but we just have to understand that the revolution started, around 1945, 1950, and it's been progressing and evolving ever since. So what I say is that what people are calling AI is really a digital ecosystem, which is a cybernetic system that consists of, computing devices, networks, data, and software. And much of what we're calling AI is simply a particular kind of software application that does specific things. And so the reason it's important to make that distinction is that when people talk about governing AI, if you're going to govern somehow the capacity to do machine learning applications, then you're going to have to control everything about ICT, everything about digital ICT, I should say. So, and that seems to be what some people actually have in mind. For example, some of them were talking about, well, in order to control AI, we have to put ourselves in control of computing power, right? There has to be a central authority that says, are we going to allow you to have this much computing power or not? And presumably they would make these decisions based on, some kind of advanced understanding of how you're going to use this computing power. Or they're going to say, in order to protect ourselves against your bad AI application, we're going to control cloud computing so that you will not be able to distribute your application to various parts of the world that don't want it. So, if indeed you're talking about some way of controlling in advance the capabilities to do machine learning applications, you really are committing yourself to controlling every element of that digital ecosystem: computing devices, networks, software, and data. And I think that's just the wrong way to think about the problem.
So, to a certain extent, you're saying that if you're looking at controlling upstream, that means you need to control a lot of things.
Yes, and yes. By upstream, you mean further down the.
Like, the whole value chain,
Right,
basically. You're saying
exactly.
if you want to control the whole ecosystem, then that means that you have a long chain to follow, and you have a lot of things that you need to control.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, well, um, you also point out in your paper that issues like misinformation, bias, cybersecurity, they predate modern AI or AI as we know it today. Can you share an example that shows these aren't really new AI problems, and what we should learn from that?
Yeah, I think the best one is simply this idea of misinformation, right? So people say AI is a problem because of its capability to distribute misinformation. But if go back to, let's say, 1995, here's an article I found on Google Scholar. It's called Disinformation and Misinformation Through the Internet, Findings of an Exploratory Study. So they have, we're beginning to notice that when you search for things on the internet, oh my gosh, some of the things that you find are not true. And because it was on the internet, many people thought that it had to be somehow credible or true in the early days of the internet. I don't know if you remember that, but I certainly do. We used to joke about it in a library. I was in a library school at the time. And um, I remember the librarians all saying, you can't trust what you find on the internet. You need a librarian to tell you what the quality of the information is. And of course, it was true that you can't trust everything you find, and that the searches that you were conducting and the websites you were finding were not necessarily true. But, uh, that's just almost an inevitable consequence of the massive expansion in the scale and scope of information retrieval, right, that the internet enabled. Of course, you have disintermediated the old structures like librarians who told you what was acceptable reference material. And the other reason this is not new is that what was giving you these search results, right, at that time? In effect, that was an early form of artificial intelligence. You had robots searching the internet and scanning all of the websites automatically according to a program, and then returning to the search engine company a indexed version of the web, which then used a social graph or a network graph to decide what was the most important form of information, and then automatically, which means AI, right, automatically spitting out, here's a bunch of information resources that responds to your query. And again, that's been going on since the most advanced form, Google's PageRank, has been going on since 1998 or 99. And before that, there were earlier forms of scanning robots and search engines that go back to 94, 95. So, and again, people were complaining that these search engines were giving us biased results sometimes. Like, if you search for I don't know, a CEO, you would get maybe more male images or male names than females. And so people would say, well, this is search engine bias. Or advertisers and spammers learned how to manipulate search results by putting things into their metadata of their website. And there was a whole industry of search engine optimization. This is all just ways of kind of trying to manipulate or control the results of an AI application. And again, this has been going on for 30 years.
Yeah, it wasn't just industry manipulating search. Sometimes you could do search bombing. I remember that in the old days, where people would by using, I think it was with search prediction, where
Yeah,
search would predict what you could look at by searching for the same thing. A massive amount of civil society searching for the same thing, they would alter the search predictions in a certain direction.
right, right. Yeah.
So I don't think you can still do that, though. I think the machine is too big for that.
It's too big. It's harder to do. But the point is, you are interacting with an artificial
Yeah,
intelligence mechanism that is distributed and globalized, and you're trying to control the results, or you're objecting to the results in ways that are very similar to what we're hearing now about AI. Of course,
yeah,
the new applications are much more powerful.
yeah. I think that is probably the biggest difference. It's still algorithms, it's still automation. It's just the size and the capabilities that are impressing people, I think, a lot more. In your paper, you look obviously at the policy side of things, and you urge policymakers to focus on specific applications instead of going for those broad AI rules and those ecosystem type rules. What does that look like in practice, and why would it be more effective, do you think?
Actually, it's very simple how it looks like in practice. It means that the policy problems posed by a specific application would require different kinds of responses depending on the nature of the problem. So, just to be specific, One of the most famous objections to facial recognition, which of course is an AI application, was a famous incident in Detroit, Michigan, where a jewelry store, somebody robbed a piece of jewelry, and we got a blurry picture of them on one of these closed circuit cameras, and it was this heavyweight black man. And so they did a search, a facial recognition search in the police department, and they came up with the wrong guy, who was, of course, a heavyset black guy. And they go and arrest this guy, and it's very embarrassing. You know, they arrest him in front of his family, and he's clearly not the right person. He had an alibi. He wasn't. He never went to that store. Okay, so was this a problem with facial recognition technology? Can you solve a problem like that by regulating FRT? And the answer is no. What you do is you regulate police practice, right? You say, number one, you cannot use cameras that are so blurry that they don't provide good results. Number two, your recognition algorithm has to be of a certain quality before you can arrest somebody based on it. Number three, your police has to check before they arrest somebody, does this guy have an alibi? Is he actually the person who was in the store at the time that the theft occurred? So those are all, that's an example of how you might regulate AI, but it's all based on a very specific context and application in which you would know what the problem is and you would have a clear idea as to how to solve it. If you're telling me you can stop that from happening by regulating, rules or promulgating rules that apply to every form of facial recognition, including the one on your phone, when you open it up and unlock it, I'd say you're crazy. That's just nonsense. You really have to be more specific. And here's another example. There are AI applications that do medical diagnosis, right? And we already require them to go through, in the US, the Federal Drug Administration approval process because, the health consequences of bad diagnosis could be, clearly bad for human health. Now, again, if you're going to deal with that problem, you're going to regulate what is a medical application, what is defined as a medical application, and what kinds of standards it has to meet, and what kind of approvals processes it has to go through which regulatory agency. But those decisions would only apply to that specific set of applications that affects human health or health diagnosis. And you can just iterate this. Again, a good exercise to engage in is whenever you hear somebody say, we're using AI to do this, or we're using AI is causing this problem, just substitute the word computing and see. I bet 9 times out of 10 it will make just as much sense, but you would never say, oh, because somebody used a computer uh, to crash the stock market through, rapid fire trading, that we're going to solve that problem by regulating computing, right? What would it mean to do that? No, you're going to say, here's our financial regulations. Here's the way you can interact with a market. Here's where the circuit breakers are. It all has to be very application specific.
Yeah, that actually makes me think of someone who said regulating artificial intelligence as a generic term is like regulating mathematics.
Yeah,
I mean, you can do lots of things with mathematics, but you're not going to regulate mathematics as such, but what the outcome is of your use. So I think yeah, I fully agree with your point that it's important to understand what you want to regulate and if it is that you're trying to control or not. Also, I think your point about the applications. One of our guests, our previous guest, Chiga Turk, who used to be minister, I think, of innovation in Slovenia, said regulating AI feels like regulating knives. Um, and
right,
you can use knives for cooking, or you can use knives to kill someone.
right.
And so maybe it's cooking or killing someone that you should regulate, not the knives, which comes to your point of applications. Any recommendations specific to how you can, is it really just horizontal policy making then that we're going for, where you just look at behavior and you stop looking at technology?
I think, yeah, the idea that you can regulate technology to prevent it from doing any harm in advance is an idea that, as a historian of technology and kind of a social systems analyst, it just doesn't make any sense, right? You really have to. Um, there are points at which you can establish standards or regulations specifically for technology. Let's say if you're talking about the electrical wiring in a building code, certain kinds of loads that can, have to be met by certain kinds of gauges of wire and those kinds of things. But you're not regulating the development or understanding of technology. You are regulating a specific application in a specific context. So I would have no problem with some kinds of regulations that say, okay, we know that an AI application can used by radiologists can diagnose cancer, but we want to make sure that your scanning device is of a certain quality or something like that. That would make sense. Of course, you can go too far in that direction too. Sometimes you can be over prescriptive, and you have to leave room for flexibility and innovation. But again, the focus is more on behavior and on applications than on the underlying technology itself.
Thank you, Milton. I think especially thank you for the specific cases. I think it's easier to understand than maybe going through the theory only. And we have the AI Act in Europe, so we kind of already went for regulating the technology, even though the AI Act then tries to identify risks, so it tries to go into use cases or at least in outcomes, not just in technology. Um, I think in the United States, you are developing lots of different type of legislation at state level at the moment. There's all kinds of things popping up. So hopefully, the policymakers there will listen to you and try to do something that is practical and does not regulate computing fully across the board. And thank you again for taking the time to decrypt your article. Thank you so much, Milton.
All right, thank you very much.